Hello, everyone. My name is Gregory, and this is The View from Out Here. A post came up in my Facebook feed the other day that caught my attention. It was 16 points about what the author, who is believed to be Lori Gallagher Witt, clarifies what she means when she calls herself a liberal. At some point, I'm going to do a video reciting the whole thing for you because I think it's worthy of your attention. But today, I want to talk about point number 14 in that list. I've gone into this subject on my in my video on gender identity last year, and you can find it in my channel page wherever my picture is down here. But I think getting more specific about it bears some repeating. Here's point number 14 from that post. I believe in so-called political correctness. I prefer to think it's social politeness. If I call you Chuck and you say you prefer to be called Charles, I'll call you Charles. It's the polite thing to do. Not because everybody is a delicate snowflake, but because, as Maya Angelou put it, when we know better, we do better. When someone tells you that a term or phrase is more accurate, less hurtful than the one that you're using, you now know better. So why not do better? How does it hurt you not to hurt another person? First, I need to define a few terms that I'm going to use for our purposes today. When I say the word gay in relation to me or my community, I'm referring to each and every one represented in the alphabet that we often use to describe ourselves as a group. You get to pick which letters and in which order. For my purposes today, I mean all of us. I need to establish that because it's germane to the argument I'm trying to make in favor of the unity part of community. Secondly, when I say white men, for my purposes today, I'm referring to wealthy, white, cisgendered, heterosexual, religiously separatist, conservative, toxically masculine males. And I need to specify that because I'm a cisgendered white male myself, but I do not consider myself to fit into any of the other attributes in that term. I know a lot of other people who don't either. That said, let's get started. Here's the third sentence in point 14. If I call you Chuck and you say you prefer to be called Charles, I'll call you Charles. It's the polite thing to do. I don't have a good argument against any of that. It is polite. It's what happens next if I don't make that change in my use of language. I'll give you an example. My name is Gregory, and I have a close personal friend of more than 30 years. His name is Michael, and he calls me Greg. Always. When we met, he asked my name, and I said Gregory because that's how I always introduce myself and always have. I'm 72 now, so it's pretty much an automatic response whenever anybody asks. When Michael and I are in social situations together, he will invariably introduce me as Greg, and I will invariably offer a handshake saying Gregory. That's because it's the name I prefer. Now, if that person doesn't make that correction in their use of language, I have never gotten offended or repeatedly corrected them. I can respect another person's use of language. This is not a hill I'm willing to die on. It's just not that important. Michael, that person that I was introduced to, and I, all three know what's being referred to when the word Greg comes up. So we are communicating directly with one another, and that is important. But I don't think that's the point 14 is, that point 14 is only about names. I think it's a bit of camouflage about pronouns and gender identity as well. That's what came up for me anyway. And here's where the gay community doesn't show much willingness to hold up a mirror to our own behavior. Just now, I looked up how many gender identities there are, and here's the first thing that came up. You're going to love this. There is no fixed number of gender identities. They occur on a spectrum, which really means that the possibilities are infinite. Each person might find that a certain point on the spectrum feels most comfortable and accurate, and this may change over time. The next thing on the search list said that there were 72 gender identities and listed them all. The one after that had a similar list that I looked at it and I'm reasonably sure that it was more than 72 items. I have no argument against anyone having whatever gender identity they please on whichever day suits their fancy. You have that right. Go for it. Be your beautiful self. Hell yes. The problem for me comes when there are social consequences for not making changes in the use of language to accommodate an infinite array of gender identities and keep that all straight in my 72-year-old memory, as it may or may not apply to each member of the gay community on any given day. There's a lot of us, and as I learned today, the spectrum that we are on is infinite. That's a pretty big ask, and between you and me, I'm sorry, but I'm just not going to do it. Okay, let me walk that back a little bit. I will when it comes to mind. I have no objection to using proper pronouns when I know what they are. I just don't want to get beat up if I don't get it right, and I'm a little gun shy about that. I've had to eat some troll doo-doo about this, and it hurts. I mean, who wants to be called names and accused of self-hatred or internalized homophobia? We're gay, for crying out loud. We can be brutal at times. What might those consequences be, you might ask? Let's keep reading number 14. Maybe it'll tell us. Not because everyone is a delicate snowflake, but because, as Maya Angelou put it, when we know better, we do better. I have no argument there either. All of that is true. But let's read on. When someone tells you that a term or phrase is more accurate, less hurtful than the one that you are using, you now know better. So why not do better? How does it hurt you not to hurt someone else? That sounds perfectly reasonable on the surface, but the premise of this part is a passively aggressive accusation that I have a problem with. It sounds polite and almost sweet, but that's camouflage too. It's too often a demand with social consequences for failing to adapt. It's saying that you must adjust your use of language for my comfort. If you do not, you are a bad person because you are injuring me. But interpreting someone else's use of language as an attack on one's personhood or an injury is a choice that you don't have to make if you don't want to. It's strictly optional. I don't grant the premise. Who is responsible for adapting their use of language, the accused or the accuser? For me, that's not a rhetorical question. I get a lot of flack for using the term gay instead of queer or the alphabet, despite my reasons for doing so. While I get that our young folk intend to reclaim the term queer as a positive or supportive term, the reason it needs to be reclaimed in the first place is because it's offensive. In my opinion, it's unnecessary as well. We already have gay, and the only reason that it isn't a universally accepted term in the gay community is because too many people in the gay community have assigned a gender identity to it that is not otherwise there. In that sense, to say that the term gay applies only to males is an illusion that too many of us have created ourselves and then use as a weapon on one another. It gets even touchier when you consider trans women or trans men or trans others. I know that dead naming or misgender naming a trans person is often offensive, but not always. Some trans people are not at all comfortable with people knowing that they are trans, and some profess their trans status as a matter of pride, all of which is perfectly acceptable. But there is a lot of confusion to sort through as the gay community works out all of this in public, he said as he proceeded to air the gay community's laundry on YouTube. I just don't think it serves anyone when we set up a circular firing squad over alleged injury while we are involuntarily being dragged into a fight for our lives. Again. While all of this is going on, I wonder how many of us are considering how this looks to our conservative opponents. You know, the people in charge right now, the white men that I mentioned earlier. They are, as I speak, doing a full court press to come after all of us at once. People of color and affirmative action, immigrants and citizenship, two-spirit people, trans people, and what bathrooms they're allowed to use and what sports they're allowed to compete in. drag queens and what children's stories they're allowed to read to children, if any at all, gay marriage, and even women's reproductive health. These white men are coming for all of us. One of the things that they ran their campaign on was the more excessive pieces of woke, one of which was our disagreement about personal pronouns. It's not like we aren't giving them some political ammunition to use on us. I can just hear them saying, these people, they can't agree on who they are. This looks like a good time to call in the snowplows and scoop them back into the closet where they belong. And yes, I know how bad that was. Far be it from me to agree with these vicious conservative bullies, but watching them watch us disrespect one another over this gender identity confusion, I have to admit, they do have a point. I know that we shouldn't be making decisions about how we run our movement based on what white men who couldn't care less about us might think. But I do think that it might be worth our while to look in the mirror every once in a while and maybe determine whether or not what we are doing is helping their cause. Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how did you enjoy the play? This is only one of 16 points that were made in the post that came up in my Facebook feed that I mentioned at the beginning. Of the 16 points, I loved 15 of them, and I'm going to read it to you in its entirety in the next few days because I think it's worthy of your attention and may even be of some help. So I want to thank you for hanging with me so far, and I hope I'm giving you something to think about or maybe even start a conversation. If so, please take a second to like and subscribe using the buttons below. It will help the channel get some visibility, and please don't forget about the books that I wrote for you. There they are right there. You'll find links to them in the description below as well. Meanwhile, my name is Gregory, and this has been The View from Out Here. Much love.